Hi, this is Jim Moyna here, and this is my Potomac River recap. This would have been from the 2021 Tacklewarehouse Pro Circuit. So, on the Potomac River is a tidal river, so let's start with that. You got low tide, you got high tide. There's certain ways to catch them at low tide, certain ways to catch them at high tide. So, knowing that, starting with practice, I know I got to find both ends of that. So, and I've been to the Potomac River several times. Probably half a dozen times in the past. Had some good luck, not always, but had enough luck that I know what these fish like to do at times. So going into practice, the one area I wanted to make sure I practice was Potomac Creek. That's the creek where the tournament is held, and there's a lot of tournaments that go out of there, plenty of release fish. There's plenty of reloading going on in that creek. There's good habitat in that creek. A lot of those fish that are released, they linger in there. Some of them make their home. Then of course there are fish that do leave the area completely. But there's always plenty around there. And there's various options. There's high tide options, low tide options. There's hard cover. But mainly it's grass in there, but there's a little bit of hard cover. Meaning, when I say hard cover, it's wood. So I practice that area pretty good. Then the other places I like to go are upriver. That's where I've gone in the past, is upriver scouting. Some years I fished upriver, some years not. The grass that I was looking for upriver wasn't even there. The stuff that I've done in the past was like gone, completely gone. In fact, a lot of the milfoil in that river is gone now, and I don't understand why. Even in Potomac Creek, a lot of that good milfoil from years past is gone. It's a whole different type of grass situation now. So anyways, out of all my upriver fishing, of course I caught a few here and there. And actually I thought maybe I was going to go fish some docks during the competition, because I did catch a few nice ones off docks. So, and that was a viable option. But anyways, the game plan was to start in Potomac Creek and just try to make that happen. There were 4 baits I ended up settling on that, whether it was high tide or low tide, some were more high tide specific, some more low tide, and some it didn't really matter. So let's start with my primary producer, which I used at high tides and mid tides, low tides. This would be the 1/2 ounce all-terrain tackle swim jig, and I got a swim across type trailer tied on there. This is black and blue, this color. I would use this flipping the any kind of wood. I'd also use it along the grass edges, lily pad edges, whether it's high tide or low tide. It was just a good producer. And anytime you go to the Potomac River, you better have a swim jig tied on. That's just the way it is. And the jigs seem to account for a lot of my bigger fish. In fact, on day 1, I never caught my first jig fish until I already had caught like 6 or 7 off of my worm rig that I'll show you. But once I started fishing the jig, I started calling up. So, okay, what about that worm rig? I actually don't have it tied on. And where did I set that now? Okay. Seriously, I just had it. Anyways, oh, here it is. Okay, the worm rig, it's simple. It's right there. That's your basic, it looks like a wacky rig, but what makes it a Nico rig is what we're going to call this, is, let me get up here, is the inserted weight into the one end of the worm. That's, traditionally that's called a wacky rig right there. And then you put the weight in there, and now we gotta change the name of the lure to a Nico rig. This rig came in handy. It did, the dock. I mean, I didn't fish. I ended up not fishing docks in the tournament, but it did work around the docks pretty good in practice. But in the actual competition, that was a really good low tide lure. And I'd fish it along the edges of the lily pads. You'd have these big areas of lily pads, which were really shallow. So at high tide, you got enough depth on these lily pads that the fish would just kind of disperse amongst the pads. So it was really hard to pin them down in that situation. But at low tide, all that water drains off of them lily pad flats, and there's also a lot of hydrilla mixed into them flats. So not only would you get the water draining off, but then that was all like more clear water, and that clear water would drain off, and it would drain off into these deeper edges. So I'd key on the edges of the lily pads where it was a little deeper, and then it would fall off into even more deeper water. And the water was more clear because all that clear water drained off. So you could then just cast this Nico rig just along them edges, and those bass would be, a lot of them would still be set up right along the edges of the lily pads, but some would even be off quite a ways off of it. So which is why I went with the weedless hook. So, but on the other hand, I also used a hook with a brush guard or a weed guard for this, and that reason was because I was also using it in the hard cover, meaning the wood cover. You can't throw a weedless hook into that wood cover. You got to have some kind of weed guard. I like to use the hook without the weed guard when I can, because I feel like I probably hook and hold maybe an extra 5 to 10% more with that hook compared to the weed guarded hook. Because those weed guards, I mean, they're not only do they guard the hook point, but sometimes they guard you from hooking a fish, unfortunately. So I only use that when I have to. But it paid off, because that weed guarded Nico rig did account for several keepers as well. That was definitely my number 2 bait was that worm. Number 1 would have been the swim jig, which I showed you. Number 2 would have been the Nico rig worm. Okay, now we'll get into, and those really counted for most of my fish. I did catch, just to show you a couple other things that were working. A lot of the high finishers, including the guy that won, were catching a good portion of their fish on a chatterbait. So there's the one I was using, black blue. That's 3/8 ounce. It's got a craw trail on there, which just happens one of the claws is missing right now. And I would use this more at a higher tide situation. I was using it more at a higher tide situation, although it doesn't really matter what tide you throw it. But at higher tide, when I just feel like the fish are more dispersed, and I'm just trying to cover more water. With that worm rig, that's just such a pinpoint thing that I'm not covering a lot of water. I'm fishing a very specific transition along in the low tide zone. And then the last bait is kind of a low tide bait, I would call it. This would be a prop bait right there. Okay, that prop bait, it really only worked for me under overcast conditions on day 3. I threw it some on days 1 and 2. Probably not enough to, give it a completely fair shake. But on that 3rd day with overcast skies, it seemed to work pretty good. Although the worm and the jig were still my number 1 bait even on the 3rd day. So, and that topwater bait is, I like to throw that at a lower tide. You're asking the fish to come from the bottom up to the surface. At high tide, that surface is just that much higher, and the fish has to be just that much more hot and aggressive to make that distance. So at low tide, that distance is shorter, and the fish it's just in their target zone. It's in their strike zone, what we call that. The strike zone is like the area around the fish that your lure needs to penetrate in order to draw a bite from a fish. So if your bait's floating further away, then that may be completely out of their strike zone, especially under sunny conditions. So that's why I like to throw that at low tide, and it could be over the weed flats, grass flats, or even the lily pad transition areas. I was catching them with the worm, even those types of areas as well. So as far as, I never did say how I finished in this tournament. It was a good tournament. Out of 158 boats, I finished 12th place. I missed the last day cut. The day before cut, I missed it by 5 ounces. Dang nabbit. But 12th place, I considered a victory. I didn't really, wasn't really, I didn't lose a lot of fish. I didn't have a lot of wasted time or anything. Fish well, fish clean for the most part. So it was a victory in that sense. Needed the points, so I got good points going into the last tournament at the St. Lawrence. So that's about it from the Potomac River. Love fishing that place. Caught a decent number of fish. Caught like 20 the first day and at least 15 each of the next 2 days. So a lot of fun going there, and look forward to going back again someday, I hope. So other than that, that's about it. Over and out.